I used to have this very close friend who, for the purpose of this post, will be referred to as E. We met during my year 10 studies and quickly became best friends. E had recently moved from Sydney with her older sister due to family issues, so they were sharing a single room in a short-term accommodation facility. At the time, my living arrangements weren't exactly stable either. I was couch surfing at my ex's place, so although she had little to offer, she gave me a place to stay, half of her bed. During that time, I mended things with my parents and returned to live with them. However, E and I remained thick as thieves, spending each day together. When the time came that E's sister was ready to move out of that accommodation and with her partner, I asked if E would like to stay with me at my family home. E accepted and became my roomie. We even continued to share a bed. This was never abnormal to me, as we simply became used to being crammed like sardines at the share house. At the time, I was in a relationship with a man and had been for over a year before meeting E. However, due to a bout of issues, we lived separately and she was never confronted by his presence in our room. This all becomes relevant, I promise. Fast forward 2 years. This guy and I are over, but E is still very much a part of my life. In fact, we were still living together under the same conditions. It turns out E and I were hung up on the same guy, and unfortunately for E, this guy had eyes on me too. I thought this would be a hurdle for our friendship, but she was adamant that it hadn't upset her, and she appeared genuinely thrilled for me to have found a nice guy. We began dating and I aimed to stay at his place mainly to avoid weirdness. I knew she liked him, but he would still stay over from time to time. E would sleep in the spare room, allowing us to have the bedroom, and she never seemed to make a fuss over it. If anything, she became rather clingy towards me when he left, even giving me a ring for Valentine's Day. Anyway, here comes the creepy factor. One evening, my partner and I were sleeping. E had already gathered her items and headed to the other room for the night. It had easily been a couple of hours since we went to bed. It was perhaps 1 or 2 a.m. at this point. The room was pitch black with absolutely no light, and to this day, I have no idea what caused me to wake up, but I'm glad I did. I wearily opened up my eyes to the black room, and for a moment, I think I can see a figure in the darkness. My partner was still asleep, so I grabbed his arm and verbally announced, "I think someone's standing at the bed." He hadn't woken up enough to examine his surroundings before exclaiming, "No, there's not." Then in a panicky tone, he almost instantly revised himself. "Wait, yes there is." We both leapt up. I was straight on the light and he was ready to fight whoever dared invade the premises. However, to our surprise, as the room illuminated, we saw E just standing there. I asked, "What are you doing in the dark?" Her only justification, I forgot something." Then she exited the room like it wasn't unusual at all. She took nothing with her. My partner and I were really confused. However, that confusion dawned into concern when we realized she had literally stood there in silence, while we lay in the dark debating if someone was in the room. Then the fear of how long she had been there and what she'd done in that time. Basically did not sleep that night and awaited the following day to produce more information. However, she was distant and hovered around other members of the household, I assumed to avoid this discussion. She also ended up staying with her sister at the nearest convenience, dodging any moments of one-on-one contact with me or my partner during that time. We never actually got to ask her why she didn't speak up sooner that night. It was less than 2 weeks after this incident that she went to stay with her sister and never came back. I had to take all of her property to a family member as I was unable to reach her at all. I still wonder what caused E to have acted so strangely. She had never done anything of this nature before. I had known her for years. My partner and I are still together 5 years later, but we both get goosebumps every time we recount this event. It was truly bizarre and frightening. In 2010, I was driving from New Orleans to Eugene, Oregon. It was just me, a 24-year-old female, and my 2-year-old pit bull in a 14-foot U-Haul truck. with everything that I owned crammed into the back. A fancy flip phone and my printout of my MapQuest directions. I think the first smartphones actually came out around that time, but I didn't have one. Cell phone service was much more spottier, and there were long stretches through the desert where I had zero service for hundreds of miles. I was driving a lonely stretch of highway through central Texas when I realized I hadn't seen a town or an exit for a very long time. My giant U-Haul was really low on gas. Just when I'm starting to freak out and seriously run out of gas, I see a small town coming up. I pull into this town. It's tiny. I'm so worried about other things that I never did pay attention to the name of it. But there were only about 6 streets in that entire place. I go gas up and I'm ready to get back on the road. Except I cannot for the life of me find my way back to the highway. I circle that town about 4 times and start getting so frustrated because this is such a tiny town. How can I not find my way out? I literally can see the highway, but I can't get to it. I return to the gas station to ask for directions. Now when I got gas, I paid at the pump and never went in. When I enter for directions, there's a skinny, nondescript guy who has black hair hanging down in front of his eyes and looks like it could use a good wash. He's not particularly creepy, but a little rude. He never really met my eyes. He was looking down at a magazine the whole time. He gives me directions that just don't sound right at all. He's telling me to take a road that will get me to the highway in about 17 miles. For a moment, I'm dumbfounded. Then I point out that I didn't drive that far from the highway to get to this town. So why is it so far to get back to the highway? I can literally see it from the town. He's still super casual, almost like I'm an annoyance who can follow his directions or not. Why should he care? He gives me some explanation about the road curving around that really doesn't make any sense. He still doesn't look at me. Just whatever. I gave you directions and waved his hand in the direction of the door. When I got into the parking lot, my whole body started trembling violently. My heart starts racing, seemingly for no reason. I get into the truck, and as soon as I put the key into the ignition, I burst into tears. I had the most terrible feeling that no matter what, no matter how nonchalant he acted, this man had bad intentions. I didn't know what, but I knew right then and there that there's no way that I'm going to follow his directions. Yet this was the only store in this little town. And short of knocking on doors, no thank you, there was no one else to ask for directions. I decided I didn't give a shit if this town seemed like something dropped out of the Twilight Zone. I was going to drive around until I found my own way out, even if it took all damn night. Then, a big red beater of a pickup, as much rust as metal, pulls up with a quintessential Texan man, huge, husky, and in flannel and work boots. Without even thinking about it, I jump out of the truck and approach him, quickly yet wearily. Looking into his eyes, I saw a kind human being, or at least I was hoping I did. I asked him if he could please give me directions to the highway. I told him I knew it was silly, but I just couldn't seem to find my way back. He looked concerned as I was visibly upset, so he made me laugh, and very cheerfully, he gave me directions for a hairpin curve turnoff, right at the end of a small concrete tunnel that I'd already passed several times. He said it often confused travelers because it was so hard to see. They need to put up some signs or something. The sinking feeling in my stomach. I asked him how far in miles was it back to the highway. He laughed and gave me a funny look. "Miles, miss? I'd say it's maybe a quarter mile at most. You can see the highway right from here." At this point, I couldn't help it. I had to know. What happens if I drive? And then I gave him the directions to the man the store had given me. Texas looked at me very intently and asked me how I knew about that route. It was pretty far out. Usually only locals know about it. So I told him. He stayed quiet for a few minutes and then asked what the attendant looked like and if I had a map of the state. "Nope, just my MapQuest," I said, which wasn't really helpful in the situation. He goes to his truck and grabs a raggedy local map from his glove box. Spreading it out for me, he traces the route that I describe. The way the man from the gas station had told me to go led away from town, away from the interstate, and led to seemingly the middle of nowhere. Texas told me that road did go about 17 miles, right before it would dead end in the desert. I asked him what was out there. He told me that it was nothing but some junk cars and a few trailers and mobile homes, all owned by the same family. This family was known locally as troublemakers, meth heads, alcoholics, and these were the nice things town people had to say about them. And erstwhile, the clerk was part of that family and lived down that road. I'll never forget the look in Texas's eyes as he told me this. He told me that I was smart to listen to my instincts and told me to be careful traveling out there. I don't know if the man from the gas station wanted what was in the back of my U-Haul or what was in the driver's seat. Thankfully, I didn't have to find out. Thank you, random Texan stranger. You really saved my ass, and I will always remember you with tons of love. Sorry I didn't ask your name. You're forever Texas to me now. This encounter would have happened a little over 10 years ago now. I would have been a 26 or 27-year-old male at the time. I cannot 100% remember what year it was, but sometime between 2011 and 2013. At the time, I was frequently going out with my friends to bars and parties, hanging out until pretty late most weekends. The friend's house that I usually hung out at was on the side street just off a main road, where a lot of popular and crowded bars and restaurants were. You had to park on the street at his house, and during the weekend when it was busy, it was pretty common to have to park a number of blocks away. The street closer to the bars was pretty nice, but if you went a few blocks in the opposite direction, it would get a little sketchier at night. After a night of hanging out, I had to walk back to my car pretty late, which was parked a number of blocks away, towards the slighter sketchier area. This was during the winter, so I was wearing some heavy sweater and pullover, with a beanie and a knit hat on. This detail is only important as you really couldn't gather much idea about what I looked like from a distance in the dark, aside from my general height and build. There really wasn't much traffic as you got further and further away from the bars, and the roads were pretty dark without any streetlights. As I was walking down the sidewalk, a car started slowly creeping down the street, matching my pace as it pulled up beside me, and then stopped. The window of the car rolled down, and driving the car was an attractive young woman who said that I looked cold, and that I should let her give me a ride to wherever I was going. She seemed friendly, but I indicated to her that I wasn't really parked far away. I appreciated the offer, but I was just going to keep walking. She then tried really hard to convince me to get in the car with her since it was so cold. No small talk to establish any information about me to make sure I wasn't a weirdo. She was asking me to get in the car pretty aggressively. Based on what I was wearing and how dark it was, there was no way she could have really had much idea about what I actually looked like to possibly find me attractive. And even if she did, I don't know many women who would pick up a male stranger after midnight when they're alone in a car. There were about 10 bars nearby she could have gone to if she just wanted to pick up a guy. There's no reason I can think of that she would have to resort to driving around offering to pick up strangers. She continued to drive alongside me, offering a ride again, to which I declined and just kept going. Picked up my pace and eventually she drove off. As soon as she was a few blocks away, I quickly got to my car and made sure that nobody else was lurking around or close by. That whole scenario felt off, and it didn't make sense to me. I asked a few friends about it later, and every single woman agreed they would never offer a random guy a ride home, especially in that kind of scenario, even if the guy looked like Ryan Gosling or Channing Tatum. My suspicion is that there was someone laid down in the backseat of the car, out of view with a weapon waiting to rob anyone who accepted that ride. Couldn't really think or figure out any reason she would be offering rides like that to complete strangers in the middle of the night, as it would be very unsafe for her to just pick up a random person. There had to be something nefarious going on in that car. I do wonder what would have happened if anyone just hopped in that car with her. This happened 15 years ago. I was 21 years old and living in my very first apartment. It was a small bachelor apartment in a sketchy area. I grew up in a town that was known to be rough and tough. I knew how to handle myself though, and learned at a young age to keep my head down and not to go looking for trouble. My apartment building was behind a bar. A lot of customers at the bar would stand outside to smoke. When they stood outside to smoke, they would be looking at my apartment. Most of the people who were out smoking kept to themselves. A few would nod and say hello if they passed by. Never any issues. Until one evening. One evening I come home. I passed the bar and saw this extremely tall man outside smoking. As I passed, he just stared at me. I gave him a slight nod, but he didn't acknowledge. He just continued to stare. It made me uncomfortable, but I didn't think too much of it. An hour later, I hear a knock at my door. It was odd because you have to buzz people into the building. The building itself only had 8 units, and I really didn't know any of the neighbors. I froze, because I really didn't want to talk to anyone. But the knocking continued, so I finally shouted, "Who is it?" There was no response. So I shouted again, "Who's there?" Then a voice came back saying, "It's Tom." I didn't know anyone named Tom, so I shouted back that, "I don't know anyone named Tom. You must have the wrong apartment." The voice said, "Oh, you may not know me, but I know you. Open up so we can talk." I went over to the peephole, and it was that tall dude from the bar. I loudly said, "Fuck off or I'm calling the cops." I heard his footsteps walk away. I hear the building door open and then close. He was gone, or so I thought. A few minutes later, I peeked out the window, and he was standing in the parking lot. He seemed to be talking to himself. At this point, I'm freaking out. I called my landlord who lived in the building next to me. He told me to call the police, and that in the meantime, him and his brother would come check things out. I call the police and tell them what's going on. They say a car is on the way. Meanwhile, my landlord and his brother make their way to the parking lot. I watch out my window and see them approach the tall dude. He takes one look at them and bolts. My landlord and his brother try to chase him, but the tall guy got away apparently. 5 minutes later, the police arrive. I give my version of events and also a description of the man. The officer stares at me and says, "We've had reports of a man matching that description who's been sexually assaulting women. Thank God you didn't open up that door." A few days later, I get a call from that officer. He told me part of their investigation was talking to the owner of the bar. The owner called the police when a tall dude reappeared after a few days, and the police responded and arrested him. So, tall, creepy dude from the bar. It was a close call, and I sincerely hope I never see you again. This happened in June 2018 in Portland, Oregon. I understand if I acted like an idiot in this situation, and since then, I've become much more observant, cautious, and honestly, much more paranoid. I went dancing with friends and was really drunk by midnight. Unfortunately, this was back then when I had a little money, and I realized you could save money by eating very little before going out, and it would take far fewer drinks to get drunk. So I was drunk, and I could barely remember my friend ordering me an Uber home. My phone was dead, of course. I can vaguely recall them helping me into the car and telling me to get home safe. I don't remember greeting the driver or the first minute or so, but soon after getting in, he asked how my night was and if I smoked. Honestly, I think I was just thinking about bed at this point, so I just sort of slurred out that I did sometimes. He then offered me a joint. And this is the first moment I got sort of nervous and began paying attention. I tell him something like I'm just really tired and ready to get home. I think he said something about it being indica based, and it was great for sleep. Once again, I say something not exactly like no, but not a yes, which he still takes as a yes. I'll take the joint now. Once again, I'm still drunk enough that I can barely see straight or speak clearly. So when he says, "Okay, well, I have to cancel the ride really quick because I can't give it to you while I'm on the clock," or something to that effect. It takes me a second to realize how dangerous that is, and by the time I start to say something, he's already canceled the ride and pulls over. We were just east of the Hawthorne Bridge, and it was totally secluded. Empty parking lots and closed auto body shop. No one in sight. It starts hitting me now that I'm in the car not with an Uber driver, but with some stranger. I can't call anyone, and he's trying to give me weed that could have anything in it. For the next minute or so, we're pretty quiet. Or I just can't remember any small talk that he tried to make because I was starting to panic. Every time he handed me that joint, I would take fake hits. pretend to breathe it in my mouth and not into my lungs. Felt tired, clumsy, and weak. That kind of drunk you were at the almost point of nausea. I knew I couldn't do much more of anything to defend myself at that point. I remember vividly being fixated for a moment on the fact that I didn't even have a pair of keys to defend myself with, as my building used fobs for just about everything. I didn't take my mail key with me. As I'm freaking out, I look up to see the guy is sort of noticing, and I make eye contact with him in the mirror. He was just like staring at me, but I couldn't read his expression. Finally, he says something along the lines of, "Well, let's get out of here." I tell him I'll just call another Uber to get home, thinking at this point it might be even safer to walk, and he says, "No, I still have your address. I'll just take you home." For a moment, I was relieved. Guess I wanted to believe him so badly that he would get me home safe. So I tried to calm myself down, thinking that he hadn't actually done anything threatening. Maybe he was just your typical stoner guy and I'm overreacting. During this time, I lived on the PSU campus in downtown Portland, in the southwest area of the city. He is driving me on the northeast side of the river. There are several bridges to our left, and he keeps moving north as he has several opportunities to take an exit to hop over the river and get me back downtown. Keep skipping them, and keep passing bridge after bridge that could get me home. Up in the northeast Portland, there are some large industrial areas that can get very isolated at night, and Portland in general is surrounded by a lot of forest. So I knew he could have me in a secluded area and really quickly. After he passes the fourth exit to a bridge, I've been racking my brain for a way to make him actually take me home and say something to the effect of, "Hey, my boyfriend is waiting for me at home," which was true, though I said it in a very meek way. My driver says nothing, but he did take the next exit for a bridge and basically hung a giant U-turn that started taking me home. Even as we were on the west side of town heading south, I'm still shaking and have my hand on the door handle, thinking about just hopping out at a red light the closer we get to my apartment. My phone is completely dead, and he honestly has had several chances to hop on nearby highways to speed out of the city. I'm getting pretty close to my apartment now. I'm once again trying to convince myself that I'm being paranoid about some stoner that can't navigate the city. Although a few minutes before, I was so scared that I was crying. So once we get about 2 blocks from my apartment, I lie and tell him it's easiest to stop here and he can let me out. Again, he doesn't say anything but slows the car. Flooded with relief, and can even feel myself smile. But when I go to open up the door, it's locked. I try to lift the lock mechanism manually, but it won't budge. I look up at him instinctively to see what's up. He's got his head turned almost fully toward me, shoulders still facing the road, smiling at me. The worst fucking smile I've ever seen. It looked so mocking and it did not reach his eyes at all. I just stared, crying, asking him to open up the door. I was freaked out, still very drunk. Thank God he did. I'll never forget that sensation of vulnerability. Not just being drunk in his car with no way of contacting anyone, but even as I got out of the car, I kept feeling like he would somehow grab the back of my shirt, pull me back in, as silly as that sounds. I got home, I found out my boyfriend had actually gone out with my friends last minute and wasn't even home. He wouldn't even have known until much later that I've gotten back safe. The next day, I convinced myself that I was freaking out over nothing, which I realized still could be the case. But in my gut, I had truly felt in danger that night before. Technically, this guy could have been totally harmless, but I still think I should have texted my friend and had her report him. The big thing that made me think about this was recently hearing about how Ed Kemper, the co-ed killer, would go for practice runs, picking up hitchhikers, seeing if he could get the passengers or potential victims to trust him, or how far out of his comfort zone he could push them without them saying anything. Obviously, this guy wasn't Ed Kemper, but I hate wondering if that night was a practice run of some sorts for my Uber driver. Thanks to whoever reads this whole thing, though, I'm at a point in my life where I'm now realizing how much danger I put myself in when I was younger. And just depressed as hell, it's made me both surprised and deeply grateful that I'm still here. was just fresh off a major split when some friends of mine encouraged me to use Tinder. After witnessing my friend use it for himself, I decided to give it a go. What could go wrong, I thought. I spent hours on end swiping and swiping. Some would match and some didn't. It was fun. Then I swiped Linda and we matched. A decision I would end up regretting. We spoke on and off for a few weeks, got to know each other. She seemed like a nice enough girl. She was a bit older than me, yet looked a whole lot younger. She wasn't fussed about going out for a meal or a cinema trip or anything traditional, so we arranged to meet up at a bar instead. At first glance, she was barely recognizable from her profile picture. She looked a lot older and had clearly gained a lot of weight. Already the first red flag was starting to show. That's not the major problem though. We got our drinks and got into some good conversation and seemed to have a lot in common. Maybe too much. My instincts, I had the impression that she perhaps did some research on me somehow and was trying her best to impress me. There then came a point of awkward silence. I thought of something to say to kind of break the silence, but she already beat me to it. "Let's talk about sex," she said. I was too stunned to get out of my head around and how forward it was, straight to the point that she was. She asked me about my sex life and what stuff I got up to with my previous partners. We exchanged a few stories. To be honest, mine didn't seem half as exciting as hers, so I just kind of made a few things up. I never felt comfortable talking about this to someone, especially on a first date. It was at this point she would reveal something to me that made me sick from the pit of my stomach. She told me that she liked bondage and that she liked to torture and abuse people just for fun. One story in particular, she told me that she had tricked a man into getting into bed with her, and how shocked he was to lie down on a bed full of thumbtacks. At this point, I was quickly slurping my drink and getting my excuses ready to leave. She told me her final story. She said that only the week before meeting me, she met a man from Tinder, got him to take her to his own flat. She said she was well prepared, had a big bag full of items in her car, quote-unquote bondage tools. Then to my horror, she told me that she'd wrapped him up in cling film, over and over again from head to toe until he was almost mummified, and then just left him there on his own flat and abandoned him. She laughed as she impersonated his mumbles for pleas for help. "He's probably dead now," she said, chuckling as she sipped her drink. At this point, I decided to leave. There was no point in staying. I didn't even want to question if this was a joke or not. I just got up and left. She attempted to kiss me, but I swerved out of her way. Just got up and left as soon as I could. Safe to say, I never met her again, and I hope I never will. Hey everybody, thanks for listening if you stuck around to this point. If you haven't yet, please hit the like button, the subscribe button, and that notification bell to be notified when future episodes come out. If you have a true scary story of your own, feel free to send it to my email or post it to my subreddit. You can stalk me on Twitter, you can stalk me on Instagram, and you can also stalk me on Facebook. Yeah. All these links are below. Hey everybody, thanks for listening. If you're still here and have stuck around thus far, I hope every single one of you has a great and safe weekend. It's Memorial Day and Memorial Day weekend, so I don't know how pro-military you are or anything like that. I served and I was in the Army for about 4 years, and all that stuff. So Memorial Day is kind of a big deal for me in this household because Memorial Day, if you don't know, which I'm sure most of you do, but I'm going to reiterate it, Memorial Day is to remember those men and women whose lives have been lost. Don't think a veteran on Memorial Day because it's not Veterans Day. It's Memorial Day. It's the time to remember the ultimate sacrifice that men and women give to us for our freedoms that we take full advantage of every single day. I'm not going to go on a big tangent or anything else really about it. Just want to make that clear and reiterate that for anyone and everyone. But more importantly, please have a safe and awesome holiday, extended nice 3-day weekend for most people. I know not everybody's going to get that, but at least here in the States, most will. So we will be, or I will be enjoying that luxury. So yeah, Make sure to, again, stay safe. Have a great weekend. And I will see you on Wednesday for the next episode. Again, no idea what the hell I'm going to do for that episode, but we'll figure it out. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it, right? All right, cool. I appreciate every single one of you. I love y'all. Thank you. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.